Hi, we're Group 4 and our presentation today is on working ethically with gay, lesbian and bisexual clients.
This online lecture will cover the ethical guidelines, history of psychology and sexual orientation, current perspectives regarding this field, and characteristics of the practitioner, all the while integrating real-world examples.
Today we'll be discussing lesbian, gay and bisexual individuals.
From now on, we'll refer to these clients as LGB clients. You're probably used to seeing LGBT, so where's the T?
Sexuality is divided into 4 components, and we're focusing primarily on sexual orientation. The other 3 are biological sex, gender identity, and social gender role.
Today we'll be focusing on orientation and thus LGB clients. And so now we'll discuss the guidelines for working ethically with LGB clients as set out by the APS.
There are a total of 11 guidelines.
Guideline 1, Attitudes and Knowledge. This advises that psychologists need to be mindful of the language they use when talking about LGBT clients. This includes acknowledging the subtle or unconscious ways stereotypes or biases can be expressed, as well as being able to recognise when they occur. If psychologists are not adept in LGBT experiences, such as coming out or appropriate language, they should seek consultation. It also requires psychologists understand the ever-changing social climate for LGBT clients, for instance on how the coming out experience has changed over the last 40 years.
Guideline 2, Work Settings. This guideline asks that we as psychologists don't discriminate and that people using our services don't use it to discriminate on the basis of sexuality. For instance, in vocation and selection assessments.
Guideline 3, Professional Development. Increasing knowledge, understanding of sexual orientation through additional education, training, consultation or a gay affirmative supervisor.
Guideline 4, Relationships. Psychologists value and respect the meaning of the diverse nature of LGBT relationships.
Guideline 5, Bisexual Clients. Psychologists need to understand the unique experience of bisexual clients as they may feel excluded from the gay and lesbian community, as well as the heterosexual community.
Guideline 6, Young People. Guideline 7, Older Clients. Guideline 8, Cultural, Linguistic and Religious Spiritual Diversity of Clients. Guideline 9, Clients with a Disability. These sections of the guidelines acknowledge the unique experience of the above, clients who also identify as LGB.
Guideline 10, Research. Psychologists must ensure that the assessment tools and measures they use do not have a biased view of sexuality.
Guideline 11, LGB Psychologists. Often LGB psychologists working with LGB clients will find themselves working and living within a small subgroup of the wider community. The guidelines advise particular vigilance in respects to the privacy and confidentiality codes.
It feels bizarre reading these guidelines as it feels like this is the obvious way we should be treating LGB clients. However, implicit heteronormative biases have been passed down through history and can subtly come through during practice.
So now that we've gone through the guidelines, let's look at the history of psychology and sexual orientation. Before we talk about sexuality in 2016, we have to talk about sexuality in 2013. Leviticus 2013, that is. It was the church who condemned homosexuality. This was based on Old Testament law that assigned the death penalty for a man who lies with a male as with a woman. As such, through the Middle Ages, churches had jurisdiction over trying sexual offences.
That was until King Henry VIII and his anti-clerical campaign, where he wanted to discredit the church and seize its property. As such, it became secular law, that is, law in the government's jurisdiction.
This is when medico-forensic experts were introduced, as the accused were subjected to medical examinations.
Meaning sexuality had moved from the church to the law and now to the medical profession.
The move towards the pathologization came as these medical forensic experts sought to determine if people accused of such criminal sexual behaviour should be considered innocent because of a defect or mental illness. So whilst pathologization is stigmatizing, in the 19th century it also served as liberating since it took the issue of homosexuality from being punishable. Suggesting that sexuality is pathological or using tests that endorse this idea is now considered unethical by Ethical Guidelines 1 and 10.
From there, many medical theorists would suggest reasons for this pathology.
So, from medical forensic now to psychiatry, it was psychology's turn to have its say.
Homosexuality, as it was referred to, has been officially classified as a mental disorder in the APA's first DSM in 1952. Viewing homosexuality as a mental illness was not controversial at the time as it coincided with prevailing societal attitudes.
In the 1940s, LGB clients were also involuntarily committed to psychiatric facilities by their families. They were often subjected to cruel and inhumane treatments. These aversion therapies are clearly unethical as per Guideline 10 and will be detailed shortly.
Finally, the idea of homosexuality being a normal variant in human sexuality came from Alfred Kinsey, a biologist, and Evelyn Hooker, who was a psychologist.
Resulting in the removal of homosexuality from the DSM in 1973, as scientific evidence no longer supported a pathological diagnosis for homosexuality.
The history of sexuality from being condemned by the church, being illegal, to being considered pathological introduces how heterocentric and homophobic biases manage to linger in modern society in both overt and subtle ways. So now in present day 2016, where is society sitting on these issues?
Whilst these days the majority of viewpoints regarding the treatment of LGB individuals largely focus on equality, there is still a minority that do not share this opinion. There is a growing belief that these individuals, whom were once marginalised within society, deserve fair and equal treatment in all aspects of life, especially within the psychological context. In order to ensure this equal access to health services, it is important to create an environment that is inclusive of all LGBT people, free from bias and discrimination.
If this does not occur, barriers that once infiltrated the daily lives of LGBT people may reappear and thus pose an issue. This reluctance of LGBT people to seek help may stem from prior experiences within society. Previous experiences of stigma or bias may lead to the expectation of inferior treatment, as this is what they have been subject to in the past. Thus, it's important from a psychological perspective to ensure that we reduce this view that psychology discriminates against LGBT clients in order to protect psychology as a profession and improve the wider population's overall views of psychology.
From a government perspective, discrimination against individuals on the basis of sexual orientation is outlawed through the Sex Discrimination Act 1984. Moreover, 2008 saw the amendment of 84 laws that discriminated against same-sex couples in a wide range of areas, including taxation, employment and Medicare.
These laws inspired the creation of the APS guidelines for psychological practice with LGBT clients, as described at the beginning of this lecture. These outline the appropriate ways to treat these clients to ensure discrimination and prejudice do not infiltrate the psychological experience.
The APS has also been a long lobbyer for LGBT rights. The APS advocates for these clients on a variety of issues from organisational to systemic and social change, such as same-sex marriage.
Another such issue that the APS is working to remedy is the use of psychological practices by some practitioners to change sexual orientation. Conversion therapies, as they are commonly referred to, treat homosexuality and bisexuality as a disorder, even though this was proved wrong in 1973 with the removal of the term from the DSM. It attempts to cure people of their homosexuality, bisexuality through the use of positive punishment techniques, such as advising men to wear an elastic band on their wrist and flip themselves whenever they feel the desire towards another man. Other instances include the use of slight electric shocks when images of same-sex appear.
This form of treatment highlights major issues in the way LGBT clients are viewed by some practitioners. APS requires that psychologists avoid discriminating unfairly on the basis of sexuality, as outlined under APS Guideline 3.1. It also requires that psychologists do not use the assessment tools that have biased views of homosexuality or homosexuality as a disorder, Guideline 12.1. Conversion therapies do both. This form of therapy is unlike anything that is used on other clients and is evidence that discrimination is still occurring despite a large amount of society being welcoming and equal. Instead of attempting to understand differences and work in a collaborative way with clients, this therapy is looking at homosexuality in an extremely outdated way.
Philip Pocock, a 58-year-old ACT psychologist, is an example of a practitioner who has been deregistered for failing to work in line with the various codes expected of psychologists. Mr. Pocock lost his registration with the Psychology Board of Australia for expressing his personal views on homosexuality in a public forum. During 2012, Pocock was running in a local election where he expressed personal views regarding the treatment of LGBT peoples. He publicly endorsed the criminalisation of gay sex and believed that it should be acceptable to discriminate against LGBT clients in areas such as employment and accommodation.
Pocock's statements bring the profession of psychology into disrepute and cause offence and harm towards these individuals. Pocock's actions show little appreciation of his obligations to the profession of psychology and to the fair and equal treatment and welfare of clients.
These overt examples of discrimination can turn LGB clients away from seeking psychological help. However, for the clients that do use psychological services, discrimination may still be felt in more subtle ways. Having discussed the history of psychology and sexual orientation, as well as the current perspectives of the APS and the government, let's talk about how each psychologist needs to act in present day to comply with ethical guidelines.
The opposing values that a practitioner can hold regarding clients who identify as LGB can strongly impact the efficacy of psychological treatment and in some cases can be detrimental to the health and well-being of these clients. As discussed, overt biases toward LGB clients within psychotherapy have largely diminished over time due to improved attitudes, progress in LGB-focused literature, and better training opportunities for practitioners on LGB issues.
In today's world, clients still continue to report cases of substantial judgment and hostility from their therapists. As discussed, although more overt forms of heterosexism have diminished over time, Shelton and Delgado Romero suggest that implicit and/or explicit negative attitudes towards LGB clients are now expressed in more subtle forms of bias known as microaggressions.
Microaggressions are described as any verbal or non-verbal behaviour that communicates derogatory messages towards LGB clients within psychotherapy. This can be demonstrated through the wording of therapist questions, the cues they present, and potentially through their body language. For example, a psychologist may change their physical demeanour or posture when a client discloses that they identify as LGB.
Microaggressions are often communicated by therapists unconsciously and free from ill intent, highlighted through the experiences of an LGB client who stated that it is pretty pervasive, I think, but I don't think it's malicious, it's just they don't know.
Shelton and Delgado Romero analysed the retrospective experiences of LGB clients in psychotherapy and suggested that there are 7 key themes that encompass microaggressions within the therapeutic relationship. Within these themes, there is evidence of violations of the APS LGB guidelines. Specifically, all themes show violations in respect to Guideline 1, Attitudes and Knowledge, Guideline 3, Professional Development, Guideline 4, Relationships, and Guideline 5, Bisexual clients.
The 7 key themes include:
Theme 1. The assumption that sexual orientation is the cause of all presenting issues. This can be particularly harmful as it illustrates to a client that their sexual orientation is the key problem, asserting that once this problem has been treated, all of these difficulties that they face will reduce.
Theme 2. Avoidance and minimising the importance of the client's sexual orientation. This can convey to a client that when they experience problems pertaining to their sexual orientation, that these are not important or that they should feel uncomfortable discussing these issues because their therapist is displaying discomfort. This is supported by the experience of an LGB client who stated that
the therapists I have seen have either avoided talking about sexuality altogether, or when they have talked about it, have assumed me to be heterosexual, making it harder for me to bring up the issue.
Theme 3. Attempts to over-identify with LGB clients. This can be demonstrated as a therapist frequently references to someone that they personally know who identifies as LGB within a therapy session, or may be displayed as a therapist attempts to befriend an LGB client and consistently engages in small talk to ease potential tension within the therapy. This may send a message to LGB clients that the therapist is assuming that all issues regarding LGB sexual orientation are the same for all people.
Theme 4. Making stereotypical assumptions about LGB clients. For example, a therapist may be visibly shocked when a gay man indicates that he works at a hardware store during a therapy session. This type of microaggression reinforces the idea that all LGBT people are alike and therefore that all LGBT people face the same issues.
Theme 5. Expressions of heteronormative bias. As previously discussed, overt heteronormative biases have largely diminished, however, more subtle forms still exist. For example, a therapist's office may display heterosexual books and pamphlets, or perhaps as an LGB client discloses their sexuality, the therapists reinforce that they are heterosexual. This sends a message to the client that they are abnormal and that they should feel uneasy and embarrassed about their sexual orientation.
Theme 6. Assumption that LGB individuals need psychotherapeutic treatment. This is demonstrated if the therapist encourages a client to remain in treatment against the client's wishes. This suggests to a client that they are unable to make rational decisions and reinforces the idea that LGBT sexual orientation is pathologic. This relates to our ethical code of informed consent and echoes compulsory treatments that have occurred in the past.
Theme 7. Warnings about the dangers of identifying as LGB. This can be displayed as a client discusses experiences of discrimination. A therapist may assert that this lifestyle brings certain problems with it, suggesting that problems that a client faces are their own fault for choosing an LGB identity.
All these themes show blatant ignorance to the guidelines.
So, how do these microaggressions really affect the therapeutic relationship?
Well, they can have a long-term enduring psychological consequences for LGB clients. Shelton and Delgado Romero indicated that LGB clients who had previously experienced biases based on their own sexual orientation during therapy continued to express helplessness, frustration and anger whilst recounting what had previously occurred in the therapeutic sessions. Such emotional experiences tended to alter the client's views of therapy in such a way that extended or prevented clients from returning to therapy in the future.
Microaggressions can have severe implications upon the efficacy of treatment. Research conducted by Little suggests that LGB clients who indicated that their therapist had blamed their problems on their sexual orientation and/or insisted on concentrating on their sexual orientation, despite the client indicating that this was not relevant to their problems, were approximately 5 times more likely to terminate the therapeutic relationship after just one session compared to the clients whose therapist did not demonstrate this inappropriate practice.
This is supported by the direct recount of an LGB client who stated that
the psychologist I was seeing insisted I was not gay, only going through an identity crisis. I was gay since age 12 or 13. It was my first experience in therapy and it only served to continue my confusion for several more years. I discontinued therapy after 4 sessions and was seriously depressed.
Similarly, because of microaggressions, LGB clients' active participation within the therapy is often compromised. Fears of being seen as abnormal or different often prompt LGB clients to withhold personal information regarding their sexual orientation and issues relevant to this. If an LGB client has issues that do not regard their sexual orientation, they often feel a need to be deceptive in order to get their therapeutic needs met.
So, what can we as psychologists do to ensure that we don't allow these subtle biases of our society to come through in our practice?
Pikankas and Goldfried suggest a few ways. Here are 2.
1. Seeking assistance from a gay affirmative supervisor. Seeking a gay affirmative supervisor will ensure psychologists are competent, thus upholding guidelines.
2. Examine own sexual orientation. An understanding of what our sexual orientation is and means to us can positively influence our therapeutic relationship, as it's believed that as we are part of a heterocentric society, we may try to counter or deny our same-sex feelings, implicating the way we treat others. This upholds Guideline 1, knowledge and attitudes.
Likewise, it is important that psychologists have an honest evaluation of their own attitudes towards LGB sexual orientation. Psychologists who become aware of their potential implicit biases are able to seek particular training and services to then enable a more ethically sound and competent service for all LGB clients.
Today we discussed how to work ethically with LGB clients.
Specifically, we took you through all 11 of the ethical guidelines.
We then took you right back to the Middle Ages to help us all understand how a heterocentric culture began and still manages to permeate modern-day implicit thinking.
Then we spoke about the current perspectives regarding LGB individuals, talking specifically about conversion therapies. We also used a real-world example of a psychologist who was deregistered for unreputable behaviour, which highlights how seriously the profession take ethical violations.
Finally, we spoke about microaggressions. These are implicit and unintentional characteristics of practitioners that are perceived as demeaning by clients. Using quotations from real-world clients, we discussed 7 key themes of microaggressions. We highlighted that psychologists working with LGB clients need to seek PD and use self-exploration to ensure we align with the LGB guidelines.
Thank you for watching our video, and we'll see you in class for our learning activity.